Perhaps the thing I despise most in gaming culture is when we collectively, as gamers, as designers, as judges, or as a community, go out of our way to make things unnecessarily complicated for our peers. In gaming, it's of course inevitable that complicated interactions or fringe case scenarios will come up. As I said, this isn't unfortunate, but it's an inevitable reality of gaming. Now, this is an area where I believe, with of course a few exceptions, that Legend Story Studios is by and large handling quite well. But it doesn't solely fall on the shoulders of the game company to make things simple and straightforward, or to muck it up. In my opinion, as both a teacher and as a leader, one of the worst things we can do as a community is to fail to understand why someone doesn't understand. In other words, to disregard or dismiss their concerns as opposed to trying to improve the situation or to help them learn and develop. So let's get to it. When the Rules 2.0 full document drops and goes into effect later this month, there are several small and quite necessary changes that add significant complication to Flesh and Blood. The changes are a net positive, but it doesn't make an already complicated game any less so. And it's how we as individuals and as a community deal with the rollout of those changes that will largely define who we want to be. So today I want to talk about making things unnecessarily complicated, or rather not doing so, and our role in that as a gaming community. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast. Thank you very much for tuning in and joining me tonight. And hey, get those dislikes ready. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, if you're someone who frequents the channel, you buy into the community first attitude. And that's really what I'm talking about, is how we as a community can work together to improve community. That's fundamentally what we're talking about, right? Now, ironically, I worked on the script for tonight during a weekend that my wife and son were on vacation. I had the whole weekend to myself. Basically, I was logging a whole bunch of scripts and stuff and just kind of keeping them in my back pocket for the future, to attack in the future. And, when Rules 2.0 announcement came and the fact that it's on the horizon, it made this so much more time relevant. So here we are. Now, tonight's cast is sponsored by our friends over at FabDB, which you guys are all well aware is the best resource we all have on the interwebs. You can go over there, deck build for your heart, to your heart's content, look at other decks, source deck lists, do comparisons. There's collection management over there. There is everything you ever want to do. And while you're over there, you can upgrade your account and unlock more things you ever wanted to do. It's really a great resource. And I want to thank our friends over there for sponsoring us and keeping the wheels going here. Now, a personal disclaimer for tonight's video is that I'm exceedingly passionate about the topic of teaching and learning. I believe in my core that making things clear and easy to understand creates a welcoming environment where people feel that making mistakes is simply a part of the learning process. I also believe that doing the opposite creates the opposite, which is an environment where people ultimately don't feel welcome. So to start tonight and to paint a picture while removing the fab-centric emotion out of it, I want to take a quick moment, just stick with me, and talk about an example from another game I play. So what I'm showing up across the screen right now is Star Wars Legion's card Saber Throw and an associated unit card to make it make sense. Now, many of you are aware in miniatures games, typically if you're in base contact, you can punch somebody in the face, or in this case, chop them with a lightsaber. But if they're away from you, you can't reach them, right? So it makes sense. Maul and his lightsaber, he can attack you in the face with 4 reds and 4 white dice. But what Saber Throw does is choose one of your melee weapons. Perform a ranged attack with that weapon against an enemy using half of that weapon's dice rounded up. So basically what it does, it lets Maul throw it across the room, use the force, bring it back, easy peasy lemon squeezy. However, you can see where it's reasonable where someone would ask the question, well, I'm having the dice, I'm throwing 4 reds and 4 whites. It doesn't tell me how to have those dice, right? Am I throwing 4 reds? Am I throwing 4 whites? Am I throwing 2 reds? Am I throwing 2 whites? It's perfectly reasonable for someone to ask that question. And that question comes up all of the time in Star Wars Legion because, despite the fact that, as you can see there's actually room on the bottom of the card for them to have added clarification text, they chose not to. and many questions have thus come out of it. So here's an example just from a Reddit that I made on a simple Google search. Someone asked a question, and it was answered. And then he said, is there a source for this? I'd just like to see an official ruling. And someone in the community responded, there's no need for a ruling. The rules don't say you have to have each color, only a number of decks. Do what the rules say, not what they don't say. Now, while this individual's response is technically correct, it's also a dick move, right? There was no reason for him to essentially, and yes, I'm paraphrasing here, and maybe this isn't what the individual meant, but how this reads is, you are stupid for asking this question. That is how this reads. That is how I interpret it, and I'm pretty sure that's how the OP interpret it, right? So as a community, that individual represented his community in that case and made that person feel dumb for asking what I think many of us would think is a relatively reasonable question. Now, let's go on the flip side and consider probably the second most made mistake. We'll talk about the first one, but the second most made mistake that new players make in Flesh and Blood, or at least they used to when we drafted WTR, to be fair, which is Dorinthea and Dawnblade, right? How many of us at our first draft teaching new people had to point out that, yes, you need that second action point to attack with Dawnblade when it hits, right? So you'll notice what I'm showing up right now is the change that was made by LSS between first edition and alpha and unlimited. You'll see that Dorinthea in the original print did not have clarification text, but in the second printing, they added clarification text that just says very simply, you must have an action point to attack an additional time. I cannot think of a better example of company taking additional steps just to clarify something, right? And I do want to go back because this did happen. You guys can go back and search for it. I'm not going to because it takes me more time than it's worth, but you guys can certainly understand that back then people would be like, that clarification text is not needed because you just don't have the action point. You just know the rules, right? But LSS took the extra steps, which is what a great example and why I'm bringing it up of how we as a community can take extra steps, whether they should be technically needed or not, to help someone understand, right? And I applaud LSS for doing what they did here. Now, in Fab, there are certainly areas that seem oddly complicated, where cards read different than they work. There's a complicated interaction between two cards that set a precedent for another rule. That's usually where things go sideways, then bleeds in other situations, and you guys get it. Now, there's of course always room for improvement, but I believe that LSS, such as the example above, has at least demonstrated their willingness to take non-necessary steps to clarify things, which is fantastic. And yes, like I said, I absolutely applaud it. Good job, LSS. But the community at large and LSS are two different things, 100%. In many cases, like rules writing, LSS has to be technical and exact. It just makes sense. But in many cases, it's extremely complicated and can be very, very, very confusing. And it's in these times that the community has a chance to step up and help, right? LSS has to define the rules in a complicated way so we can step in and make them less so when given the opportunity. However, the Fab community at large doesn't always seem to be on board with this philosophy. Now, I want to harken back way, way, way to the beginning days of Flesh and Blood. And actually, I think I posted this video within the first couple months, titled basically, what LSS needs to change now. And let's be honest, there were a lot of things I was wrong about. It was for my first impressions of the game, some stuff I wanted them to change, or at least look at differently. One of the big ones being I wanted the rules to improve and be a little more user-friendly. But the other thing was the first mistake that most people make when they get in this game is they defend with defense reactions. It's something that we all have done, right, at some point in our career. Maybe not the one, but again, if you're the person who's saying you didn't make that mistake and you're poo-pooing on other people, you probably already disliked the video and went away. So fair enough. But for those of you who have taught others, you're well aware that defending with a defense reaction, right, and by that I mean not playing a defense reaction, but defending with a defense reaction if it was a normal defense card is something that everybody has done. So the suggestion I made, screenshot right over here, was that, hey, wouldn't it be, what if we were to change the color on defense reaction to just put a little something in your mind that, hey, this works different than the other stuff? That was my suggestion. The outpouring and outcry that I got from that suggestion floored me. I was villain number one in the Fab community. You guys can go back and check. The dislikes on that video are huge. Feedback on that video is very negative. Anyway, point is, there was a lot of individuals in the community who poo-pooed on the idea of making something simple. My proposal didn't change. If they didn't like it, they didn't like it. But to hate on the idea of trying to make something simple for a new player, I thought was very embarrassing for the Flesh and Blood community. Now, to be fair, we've grown a lot on that, right? And whether someone back then agreed with it or not, the argument that helping to streamline things or whatever shouldn't make someone an enemy. They should at least make someone, evaluate, that's, how could I help teach someone better, right? Whether, like I said, whether or not the card needs changed or whatever, you should be saying, how could I help someone learn better? How could I change my teaching procedure? Whatever it may be, right? And that in my example, then that is a fabricated example. It was an absolute failure of the community for exactly what I talked about, the entrance. In order to play with us, you must think like us and understand things the way we do. And that, my friends, is a fail. Because a good leader and a successful community will value itself on communication and learning and not through gatekeeping. Now, as you can certainly tell, yes, I'm particularly sensitive to the particular issue, not just as a gamer and as a person, but also as a teacher and a leader. Now, much of this perspective comes through my decade-plus experience in my real-life career, where my engineers, who are in most cases very highly educated, are writing directions or procedures for our technicians who are also very, very smart individuals, but might not necessarily think in the same way. Now, from a management perspective, I like to use the phrase, which is a play on an old adage, mess up my instructions once, shame on you. Mess it up twice, shame on me. And the idea behind that is this. You wrote the directions, and in this analogy, the rules to the game, and people didn't understand them right away, at least with the way they were conveyed. That doesn't mean they're dumb. That doesn't mean they're wrong. That means there's an opportunity for improvement in how we do things. So there are two ways as an owner to respond to this scenario. One, you say, they don't get what I wrote because they're dumber than me. Or the other, okay, how can I improve what I wrote? How can I make it easier for people to understand? Now, a lot of chat there that's not Fab related, I get it. But I believe that the recent release of the Fab 2.0 rule set, or at least the forecasting of such, it's not technically out yet, I feel is introducing some really necessary and awesome things that will help improve the game now and into the future. However, let's be honest, the writing and explanation in many cases leaves a lot to be desired because, let's be honest, they have to be technical. They have to be, in many cases, complicated to make sure that everything's exactly spelled out. And while yes, I do personally think there's room for improvement in their writing, it doesn't have to read like a learn to play. And this is where our job, our role as a community comes in. It's going to be completely natural and, dare I say, okay for a large number of players to be very, very, very confused by some of these upcoming rule changes and what they mean. Because they are complicated, right? They are. And there's going to be some out there, dare I say, even some in the community and other content creators whom I watch religiously and respect, who will basically just default to, what? If you can't figure it out, then you don't deserve to be here, get good, and all that associated stuff. And you know what? They are actually the person that I'm talking to tonight because they're what I'm referring to basically as the problem. The guy who can't understand why others can't understand. So again, like I said, for the third time, I believe, I'm very passionate about that being wrong. Because I believe, again, as a teacher and as a leader, that a true sign of intelligence isn't one holding on to intelligence and knowledge and keeping it away from others, but being able to communicate it and share it and teaching others to get there. Okay, so a lot of emotion there. Lecture and grandstanding aside, let's go ahead and get into this. I hate gatekeeping on every single level. And that is, we go back to the very, very first example I gave, the Star Wars Legion example. Calling someone dumb for asking a reasonable question, right? Let's be honest. There are a lot of people who ask dumb questions in these type of games, especially those where they could have Googled the answer, but instead went through more work to ask the question. I get it. That's frustrating, right? But gatekeeping the game by saying that you have to be at a certain, gatekeeping the game by saying that you have to think about things in the same way as the people that play it, that is not a method for success, right? Requiring people to put their own work into understanding is not unreasonable. But saying that we all have to think the same way is only going to be a recipe to keep our game small, right? And it's not going to grow our communities, right? And I want to give an analogy here of let's think about our moral responsibilities as gamers when playing, right? We need to keep a clean and organized play area. We need to clearly announce things and communicate to our opponent so that they know what's going on in our head, right? We need to make things clear and easy to understand what's happening. And I think that's the same. I think that's the same thing, right? It is an expectation when we sit down and play that you and I are on the same page and that we know what each other's doing so that we can each play the game. And I feel that to do that in game but not out of game is interesting, right? I mean, that's an interest. It'd be interesting because many of these people are very clear. They're very distinct with exactly what they do. They hit each window, but then if someone doesn't understand those windows, they might poo-poo on that person. And I find that interesting because they understand communication is important. It's just the effort of said communication is not important. So, but we do on the flip side, yes, we know that there are players out there that don't necessarily execute to that. They try to actually force misuse or take advantage of the situation. And, while I don't personally approve of that type of behavior, it is commonly accepted within a competitive game, and there's not much we can do about it except to set a good example ourselves. And I think of all of that, I think that's what carries here in this situation, right? In most cases in human behavior, one bad experience out of 99 good, right? One bad experience out of 100 opportunities, the rest being all good, you will go home at the end of the day and remember the bad experience. But there's a weird thing for most of us when we put on our learning hat, right? In that flips. If someone's reaching out and they want to learn, one person being nice and helpful and understanding can make a huge difference. So my thoughts here, my thesis statement, whatever, is remember that complications happen. But it's how we, not only to new players, but even established players in our community, help them learn that will define our success. So kind of in closing, I just want to add a few tips and then really we'll get out of here, right? The first thing that I think works the best when someone doesn't understand rules, they don't understand it, boil it down and put it in context of something they do understand, right? Like Arclight Sentinel, for example, is a great example to use for the new way that the stack is being created, right? You can say, look, Arclight Sentinel used to work like this, where you had to play it before, but now you will have a window to respond. Or another great example is Lightning Press. Lightning Press effectively, right? You used to have to effectively play Lightning Press in the attack reaction window to guarantee that it got through if they didn't defend react, right? Because then it closed. But now there will be a damage calculation step and they can play that, right? So using those examples of this is how it used to be and this is how it will be really can help people to understand. Like I said, just distill it down to the most simple example that they do understand and extrapolate or interpolate, I suppose, depending on how the situation is. But I think that's a very successful way. And then the other is to, really just sit down and go through reps and create. It's okay to sit down and stack your deck and create situations, right? Or to stop play and say, hey, this is how this works now, or this is how this will work, or here are the options you have available to you. Very, very standard teaching stuff, right? I don't think I'm cracking any eggs with that one. So anyway, that's pretty much it, right? So look, folks, I get it. In Fab, there are certainly areas that need to be complicated. They have to be from a pure rule standpoint. Cards may read differently than how they work or whatever it may be, right? But it's our opportunity to really help grow. This community is still growing, and we have and we continue to be at a point where there are other options for people to go. So if we want to keep building our community, taking the stance of embracing, helping teach people, and really moving forward from there will help all of us pay dividends in the long run. So anyway, that'll do it for me tonight, folks. I just want to remind everybody, we are still playing every Saturday at Gongai. We're having a great time with it. Nobody has yet to bring a Starvo. I freaking love my community. I freaking love you guys. That's not to say I don't like Starvo or anything like that. It's just people are playing what they want to play, and they're here to have fun and freaking love Gongai. So remember, code Commando 10. I don't get anything from that. It just helps my store out. And my buddy Travis over at Fab Foundry, if you're looking for singles, I just bought a whole bunch of singles last weekend from him. He had it ready in like less than 24 hours. It was fantastic. So go check him out. And if you use the link below, I do get a kickback from that, which can help me continue to buy singles from Travis. So anyway, folks, thank you very much for joining and listening to my mind dump and all that tonight. I really appreciate it, but it's really something that matters a lot to me, which is putting in effort to help our community grow and not becoming a community of gatekeepers, right? It's very important to me. I think it's very important to you if you've made it to this point, and I really appreciate it. So anyway, folks, thank you very much, and go Commando.